Saswata Guha, Director at Financial Institutions at Fitch Ratings. He joins us on the show as well. Saswata, good morning. Thanks so much for joining in. Your initial reaction, this was long anticipated and it's probably followed script. A large, strong bank, maybe a mid-sized, relatively stronger bank with a weak bank.
Yes, thank you and good morning. Yeah, I mean, it was certainly expected, and we obviously were in favor of consolidation in the current, given our current banking structure. What did take me a bit by surprise is that, we weren't expecting this to happen now, given that we are perhaps looking at elections in the next couple of months. But nonetheless, I think it in a way shows the commitment of the government towards pushing one of these, this was a key part of the overall 7-point reform agenda, and I think this in a way helps kickstart the process, which I believe the government will hopefully continue, in the future.
Saswata, does this really change your view on any of the three banks that were named yesterday, or the overall public sector bank space in general?
Right. Well, see, I think, for the longest time, we held the view that the system, the way it's currently structured is highly inefficient. And particularly, we were referring to the PSU banks, where there are, so many of them, where essentially, there's always, and given the experience that has been for the last 4 to 5 years, clearly those inefficiencies have come to light. So obviously, I think for a growing economy like India, where presumably our, credit to GDP is only likely to grow, we need certain large banks, large pillar banks who could obviously shoulder that extra burden and supported by a network of ancillary banks. If you see some of the most stable banking systems in the region, that's how most banking systems are also structured. So in that context, I think it's certainly a move in the right direction. The point at the end of the day, I think the important point to remember here is that when such a step is taken, it's a big step, and therefore it requires a full commitment of all stakeholders. So I think some of the challenges that I've been hearing since yesterday, I think those are to a large extent well-founded. But at the end of the day, if you are able to create a bank which is more efficient than what they currently stand individually, then I think it's good in the long run. Perhaps it will have some short-term pains, but I think you'll find that in any reform process.
Saswata, do you expect further similar announcements to come in with respect to more mergers, or do you believe that there aren't any large, strong banks which can actually absorb these smaller, stressed banks? And on the other hand, do you also see the timing of this announcement coming in as a surprise, given that the banks are currently trying to deal with cleaning up their books and this entire recovery and resolution process? Does the timing take you by surprise?
Yeah, see, like I said, I mean, the time took me by surprise because less by the fact that, whether there are equivalent banks, other banks in the system, but more by the fact that, because these are essentially government banks and it requires a certain degree of political will. And usually, when the political establishment is getting into an election mode, usually imperatives change. But I think it was in a way a positive surprise in a manner of speaking. I think, those are fair ones. I think I do expect to see further announcements, but I don't expect to see that perhaps in any time in the near or short term. I think to a large extent, my view is that the government will probably use this as a test case, try and learn out of the experiences from this merger. Of course, they already have, the SBI merger to fall back upon, but that was slightly different because ultimately they were all part of the SBI umbrella. Here, the cultures, you're essentially looking at merging cultures, and which, in my opinion, is one of the biggest challenges of merging state-owned banks. So I think in that respect, I do expect to see some more, but not immediately. And finally, coming to your question on whether we see other banks in a position, well, maybe not immediately, because yes, you're right that there are certain other large banks which continue to grapple with problems of their own. But the fact that it's happening now, in a way, to me indicates that perhaps bulk of the legacy issues are behind the banks. Of
Right.
course, there will be some new issues, but I think it sort of conveys that message in an implied way.
Well, let's certainly hope so, that the worst of the issues are behind, if not anything else. But Saswata, thank you so much for taking the time out this early in the morning and talking to us. Appreciate it.